Okay. Welcome to the Critical Issues Forum online teachers workshop. So today, I'm very happy to introduce Ms. Elena Sokova, Deputy Director of the James Madison Center for Nonproliferation Studies. She's going to give her welcome remarks to this year's CIF participants. So this year, CIF project is going to study the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, achievement, aspiration, and challenges ahead. So I'm sure that this is going to be another very exciting year for the Critical Issues Forum. So Ms. Elena Sokova was most recently the Executive Director of the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nonproliferation between 2011 and 2015. As many of you know, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Nonproliferation, VCDNP, was established on the initiative of the Austrian Foreign Ministry in 2010. She returned to the James Madison Center for Nonproliferation Studies in Montreal in the new capacity of Deputy Director in July 2015. Before the Vienna appointment, she was Assistant Director at CNS and held a number of other research appointments in Montreal. Elena is a member of the Global Agenda Council on Nuclear Security of the World Economic Forum and chair of a working group on the elimination of civilly highly enriched uranium, HEU, established by the Fissile Material Working Group. By the way, you will study what is HEU when we had a science lecture. Her areas of research include fissile materials, security and control, nuclear nonproliferation issues in Eurasia, nuclear nonproliferation and international safeguards issues, and nonproliferation and disarmament education and training. She holds a master's degree in international public administration from the Montreal Institute of International Studies and a law degree from the Moscow State University. She has numerous publications on many prestigious journals and magazines. So now, Elena, microphone is yours.
Introduction, and thank you for your enthusiasm and dedication to this program for many years. And I really want to say the warmest welcome to all teachers and participants in the Critical Issues Forum. I'm very happy that many of the schools continue to return to the program, that they have been members of this project from its inception and sometimes from the start of the work when CNS got involved. But I'm also very happy to see that each year we have new schools joining the program, and there are new exciting teachers that are joining the project that are happy to work with the students. They're interested in the subject, and that we all continue to make I think it's a sizable contribution to educating students in high schools about some of the most critical issues on the international agenda, particularly as they pertain to nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. This year's topic provides an interesting discussion that yields looking at the nuclear weapons and issues around them from so many different angles. But it also questions many of the notions related to the morality or to the way we look at many of the issues, critical issues in the international agenda. Do we look them through the security prism? Do we look at them through the humanitarian impact lens? Do we look at them from the point of view, the security of individual countries or their larger global security of the humankind? It is very interesting that we continue to have this mix of schools from the United States, from Russia, and from Japan. These are the countries, like the US and Russia, the two major powers that still hold large arsenals of nuclear weapons. Out of 15,000 existing nuclear weapons, Russia and the United States account for 93% of these weapons. And Japan is the only country that ever experienced the use of nuclear weapons in the military campaign. I'm not talking about the testing. So it is very interesting to see how the countries view both the US and Russia nuclear weapon states countries, and countries like Japan relying on the so-called nuclear umbrella view this treaty, how they viewed the negotiation process of the treaty, how their views are changing maybe nowadays. So that would be a very interesting angle to look at some of the issues that you will be studying this year. As you know, that you already probably had a lecture, you will be listening to it during the teacher's development period. The lecture was provided by Gauhar Mahajanov from our Vienna office about the history of the negotiations of the Treaty on the Prohibiting Nuclear Weapons. And you will, you already learn, or you will learn that the negotiations itself included 135 countries. Some countries were represented by proxies. And on the one hand, we know that even in any country, it doesn't matter whether it's a nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states, everybody knows and understands that the nuclear weapons are a horrendous weapon, with a indiscriminate weapon, with an extremely high impact on the humankind and environment. And you'll be studying that with your students this year. Yet this is sort of the ultimate weapon. Yet we know that neither the nuclear weapon states nor some of the states that are part of the alliances or use nuclear weapons to protect or have agreements with nuclear weapon states to protect their security. They did not participate in the negotiations. So why is that? Why other weapons of mass destruction, like chemical weapons and biological weapons, have been prohibited? But the most horrendous one, we're still grappling with prohibiting and eliminating. So you will see that the new treaty introduces that norm, but how do we go about the implementation and how it will affect the disarmament is an issue that will probably dominate quite a significant agenda, a significant part of the agenda in the coming years. But what it does, both the treaty itself, the way it was negotiated, and how it's being viewed by different parties, how it's viewed by governments, how it's viewed by nuclear weapon states, non-nuclear weapon states, how it's viewed by the civil society, yields a very interesting discussion. And to a certain degree, I'm really looking forward to this year, because you can delve into so many different issues and look at the issue from so many different angles. One of them, obviously, you will be looking at the impact of the nuclear weapons and the effects of its use. And what is very interesting, while there is a traditionally Even in if you look back in the nuclear weapon states, there were these movies talking about nuclear winter, the understanding of the effects and impact of nuclear weapons. But the last 10 years or so, we saw a number of really interesting new studies, new data that came out about how we can measure the effect, how we can assess what would be the impact. And I'll just mention a few of them. I'm sure that you will, in your resources, you will look at some of them. One is called the nuclear famine, about the potential impact of a limited exchange of nuclear weapons between India and Pakistan, for example. There has been a very interesting set of publications and research done on how nuclear weapons, or impact of nuclear weapons, their use or testing, has different impact on women and men. So that's another interesting way of looking at the effects of the nuclear weapons. There has been, I think that one was prepared by Reaching Critical Will organizations and some others, but there is some publications by Red Cross. So what I'm trying to suggest is there is a lot of new research that has been done in the last decade that is worth looking at, not only just what has been already known for decades. It is also very interesting to look and to kind of put it in a little bit into perspective, particularly maybe looking at the way nuclear weapons were looked at after the end of the Cold War, and how the discourse regarding the nuclear weapon has changed, and how it changed in the different groups. How, for example, US and Russia for a long time thought that they may have solved some of the arms control issues, some bilateral tensions in this area, and how they saw a possibility of moving down the elimination of nuclear weapons. And yet we look at the way now non-nuclear weapon states saw it as a very slow progress, and how they started to own an agenda, because they were not really agreeing with the notion that the nuclear weapon states were putting out, that and the view of looking at nuclear weapons as just a security question. They said, well, about our security, we don't want to have nuclear weapons, but having nuclear weapons existing could lead to a miscalculated incidental launch, other problems in the history of a nuclear accident. Also point out that, and now with the nuclear terrorism, that's another layer of concerns. So the way the non-nuclear weapon states were looking at the nuclear weapons and presenting that problem has also changed. And then obviously overall emphasis in the work leading up to the negotiations of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Treaty, the way the nuclear weapons started to be looked at really is derived from the international humanitarian law, and looking at the impact of the nuclear weapons from that standpoint, from the impact on humans, on humanity, on the environment, rather than seeing just it through the prism of security and strategic stability. That really shifted the discussion. Obviously, that shift also was part of the learning from previous campaigns, for example, from the campaign that led to the prohibition of landmines. So that's the change in the international approach to challenges in the international security. has also played a big role in how the negotiations and the work that led up to the negotiations unfolded. The other interesting issue to look at is the role of the civil society in promoting this agenda. You probably already heard and know that the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, received a Nobel Peace Prize this year for its work and its contribution to the negotiations of the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. The organization itself was founded in 2007, so it's really 10 years of work that went into a massive campaign by this organization. It has more than 400 partners, actually 468 partner organization in more than 100 countries. It's sort of a loose network that really has one common language, despite all the other different issues that this organization may be tackling, but they were really all in agreement about the main goal, to prohibit nuclear weapons and to launch the legal and binding process to eliminate nuclear weapons. The way the ICAN also worked was really different from many other campaigns that, or general kind of non-proliferation disarmament society or different stakeholders work. First of all, it saw quite a lot of involvement of very young people, them being very creative about using like campaigns with staging the acts, with using social media, some creative ways of delivering their message and everything else. And what most importantly, within all these different organizations, they were able to really come up with a message that resonated really well, both with the general public, but also with national governments. That's why there are so many governments and different stakeholders, international organizations, and everyone else were able to really internalize that message and agree with it and use it for working towards the negotiation of the treaty and its successful negotiations. Going back to what are the other issues and concerns that, or just topics that can be discussed. Despite that very big part of the campaign, and many countries, as I mentioned, 135 countries participated in the negotiations of the treaty, why on the other side we had very little attention paid to this campaign and to the negotiations in the nuclear weapons states. At least from the standpoint of the US and from what I saw in the Russian media, there was very little in terms of the coverage of these issues in the mainstream media. There was very little in terms of the public debate on these issues. There are, of course, some organizations that participated in ICAN or were following these issues, but none of these issues reached a high attention of the media. We're slowly catching up, and ICANs, for example, receiving the Nobel Prize yielded some publications in the New York Times magazine and some others, but still it's far from being widely known and widely kind of spread knowledge about both the treaty and even the Nobel Peace Prize. I actually had I had to speak in front of the Democratic Women of in Monterey right after or actually during the negotiations. And I asked the audience how many have heard about that these negotiations are taking place. There was no one in the audience of more than 100 people. They said, well, why? We've never heard that something like that is happening under the UN umbrella, and it's going on right now. So it's really an eye-opening how little information is available about some of these issues in many countries. It's hard for me to judge about Japan, but nevertheless, it's interesting for you as teachers to look at what you can find about the public knowledge about these issues in your countries. Another big issue to look at is what is next. What would be the impact of the treaty on the non-proliferation regime? Whether some of the concerns that nuclear weapon states were raising, that the treaty could negatively affect it, whether they are justified, whether they will translate into any developments in this area. What would be the impact on the general decision-making in the international arena? How it will affect the work of other international organizations, particularly when they look at the questions related to the way security issues are considered, arms control, non-proliferation, disarmament. Will the treaty help actually move the disarmament and achieve programs down the road, or it will have actually the opposite effect? Some people say that it may stall the disarmament process or have negligible impact. And what would be the impact on the public, general public, and its involvement in nuclear disarmament? Particularly, what would be the impact on the next generation? How much they will be able to pick up the message, how they look at these issues. And so that's the issues that are very much key on around this topic of the treaty. You can always look at how the various international figures and even celebrities view this treaty. Obviously, on one hand, you see the statement by the United States, United Kingdom, and France that clearly says we don't support, we will never sign, we will never join this section. And then you have something like a very recent conference in Vatican where Pope Francis was speaking about the disarmament and the treaty, and there is the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's statement. There are many other celebrities and former senior figures in the government providing comments. Another interesting way to look at these issues is how current developments and events can affect the discussion and the progress of the treaty, particularly the nuclear and missile programs of the DPRK, whether how it's shaping the discussion. Obviously, some of the statements and by Trump administration and Trump himself, how is the rising tension in the US and Russia relationship may affect these debates. So there is a whole variety of angles and views to look at during your work. So these are really challenging issues and gives a lot of work and thought process and looking at different, from political to technical to legal issues. And from our CNS standpoint and all who work in this area, I really want to say thank you to all of you who are working with high schools on these issues, for you putting your time, your dedication, your enthusiasm into these issues. This is really a fantastic opportunity to talk about many issues and how they connect on many levels with us as human beings. And I'm excited both about having some of our staff and CNS experts to contribute to this project. I'm sure there will be others. But I also think that the developments this year will probably yield quite a good number of interesting topics and ideas or news developments that will lend a lot of materials and engage students, really engage them in the discussion of these issues. And I just wanted to conclude with a quote from Albert Einstein. I think it's really fits well into the model and the motto for the Critical Issues Forum. So he was saying that I want to oppose the idea that the school has to teach directly that special knowledge and those accomplishments which one has to use later directly in life. The demands on life are much too manifold to let such a specialized training in school appear possible. The development of general ability for independent thinking and judgment should always be placed foremost. So I think that thing about developing the independent thinking and judgment, that is very much part of the Critical Issues Forum and the part of the work that you as teachers do in raising the next generation of citizens in a big capital letter C of our planet Earth. And I once more time want to thank you for your work and I'm looking forward for another year of a very interesting, engaging, and productive program with you and your students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. You gave us a lot of important questions, and the final quote is also very inspiring. So we are very much looking forward to working with all the participants for this important topic. So thank you so much, Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck with the rest of the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me stop.